The House on 47th Street. There once were two good friends named Edwin and Rowan. They always enjoyed walking around their neighborhood. One day, they spotted a strange house on one of their streets that looked old and eerie. Edwin, Rowan said as they took a complete stop at the front gates of the house. "Want to check it out?" Edwin looked scared and said no. Without a second thought, Rowan walked in front of the gate and climbed over. "Piece of cake," he said as he landed on the other side. "Rowan, please come back," Edwin shouted. "Come on, you chicken," Rowan shouted as he began heading to the front yard. Edwin whimpered and started following Rowan, who was already at the entrance. Rowan was at the front door when Edwin finally showed up. "Finally, you slowpoke," Rowan said as he knocked on the front door. The door slowly creaked open, and the two boys slowly walked in to see the house full of people. They were talking and drinking wine. "Whoa, I thought this house was empty," Rowan said as he entered. Edwin just shrugged and went into the house as well as leaving the front door open. Edwin was walking around while Rowan was having a good time. He was talking to the other people and drinking wine, although he was only 14. He was acting so immature, dancing around like a crazed lunatic. Edwin was looking around when he accidentally bumped into a strange woman who turned to Edwin's face with a look of confusion. "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to." Edwin was interrupted by the curious woman. "It's okay, young man, but what are you wearing exactly?" This is what everyone wears," he said. The woman stayed quiet and made a strange face. Edwin just stood there, confused. He began walking and heading to Rowan, who was dancing with a girl the same age as them. Edwin stopped him and said, "We gotta leave now!" Rowan pushed him away and said, "Nah, I'll stay." With more arguing, Rowan said he would stay a while. Edwin was fed up and headed home to sleep since it was now pretty late. He woke up the next morning and headed back to the house, which now looked brand new and was painted and decorated. He knocked on the door and an old man opened it. "Excuse me, mister, is there a young man named Rowan inside? He said he wanted to stay with a girl." The old man then snapped his fingers as if he knew what happened. "Ooh, Master Rowan Johnson, I'm sorry to say, but he died of alcohol poisoning in 1890, trying to escort a lovely lady home." Edwin stood in confusion and later went to the library. There he discovered there had been a party held in that house to celebrate the success of a local company on that day in 1890. And in a very old photo, he saw his friend Rowan and a young girl dancing in the background.
Philip, Jan, and Alex were good friends who spent their summer days playing in the woods behind their homes and in an old ballpark which had now been long overgrown with vegetation. One of their favorite games was hide and seek. Their games often took hours because there were so many great places to hide in the now decaying park. So many, in fact, that often the players had to come out of their hiding places before it got dark. This day, however, only Philip and Alex showed up at the field. "Where is Jan?" asked Philip. "I don't know," said Alex. The boys walked to Jan's house to see what was keeping her. "What's wrong, Jan?" asked Philip. "Are you sick or something?" Jan looked a bit hesitant. "I'm not going to play with you guys at that old ballpark any more," she said. "We can play here if you'd like, or at one of your houses." The two boys looked amazed. "But that is the best place to play," the boy said. "You know that, Jan." Jan began to look afraid now. "I'm not going," she shouted. "Not any more." "Let's go without her," said Alex. "We don't need her. We can play just the two of us." But Philip knew it would be much harder to play hide-and-seek with only two people, especially back in that old ballpark. "Why won't you come with us?" Philip asked. "Well," she said, "my grandpa was telling me about Shavis Kravis." "Who's Shavis Kravis?" Philip asked. Grandpa said, "There used to be an old hermit who lived on the outskirts of town when he was a boy, named Shavis Kravis. He said the hermit used to come into town and offer chestnuts to children. If they accepted, then he would take them back to his house in the woods and do unspeakable things to them. Grandpa said that once the townspeople found that out, they found Shavis Kravis and they killed him. Then they tore his house down and buried him in the rubble. Grandpa remembers his parents talking about how the remains of children were found all over the hermit's house. He had saved their bones to use as tools and utensils. He used their skin as clothes and furniture, and he had wigs made out of their hair. They even found some kids still alive, trapped in cages, emaciated and half dead. When our parents were young, they were told that if they misbehaved, then Shavis Kravis might come, and their parents could give them to him." Alex was smiling in amusement. "So?" he asked. Jan looked at him sternly. "Grandpa told me to stay far away from that old ball field, because that is near where Shavis Kravis used to live." "Your grandpa's just crazy," Alex said. "Everyone knows that, and you're a baby for believing him." "Fine," she said, "but I'm not going." "Good," said Alex. "Let's go, Philip." But Philip didn't move right away, and he looked pale. But Alex grabbed him by the arm, and the two boys went to the ballpark. By the time the sun was setting that day, the two boys were having such a fun time playing hide-and-seek that they had completely forgot about what Jan had told them about the old hermit who once lived there. "Let's play one more time before going home," Alex said. "Sure," said Philip. "I'll hide so well this time, you'll never find me." So Alex started counting, and Philip ran to find a place to hide. Some time passed, and Alex still had not found Philip's hiding place. He looked in all the usual places, but Philip wasn't there. After a while it began to get dark, and Alex started calling to Philip to come out. It was time to leave. But Philip didn't answer. Soon the sun was almost down, and Alex began to feel frightened. The trees and rocks took on different forms in the darkness, and the ball field began to feel foreign to him. At the top of his lungs he called out again as loud as he could, but there was still no answer from Philip. Finally, Alex decided that Philip was not here, and he turned to run home, but instead ran right smack into a man who had been standing right behind him. The man grabbed his arm with scaly, bony fingers. Alex stared into the man's eerie face in horror. The man smiled.
"I have a chestnut for you, boy. Come with me to my house. I have many more for you."
Alex screamed and broke free of the man's grasp. He then ran as fast as his lungs could manage all the way home, never looking back. Some years have passed, and neither Alex or Jan ever returned to that old ballpark near the woods, and Philip has never been found.
It was one of the hottest summers to hit the small town of Greenville in years, with temperatures reaching over 100 degrees. Each day, the local swimming pool would be overflowing with neighborhood kids, desperately seeking an escape from the monstrous heat. There were so many kids, in fact, that the lifeguards had to turn many away because there just wasn't enough room in the pool for all of them. One day, two friends, Gilda and Olivia, were waiting at the park for their third friend Zoe to arrive. "Let's just go to the pool now," Gilda said. "If she doesn't get here soon, then none of us will get in." Olivia looked towards the road, hoping to see her friend, but Zoe was nowhere to be seen. Olivia let out a sigh. She's always late. "Okay," said Gilda. "We've waited for her long enough. Let's just go swimming. If she can't get into the pool, then it's her problem." The two girls walked over to the pool entrance, but were stopped by the lifeguard. "Sorry, girls," he said. "The pool is filled for today. You'll have to come back tomorrow." Gilda and Olivia looked disheartened. "Please, it's only the two of us," Gilda said. Sorry, said the lifeguard. What about just me then? She said. Hey! Olivia shouted, looking at her friend with disgust. Nope, said the lifeguard. Gilda turned and pouted off with Olivia right behind. As they reached the road, they noticed Zoe sitting on a rock waiting for them. Where were you two? She asked. We tried to get in to go swimming, but thanks to you, we waited too long and now can't get in. You went in without me? Sure did. Zoe stood up and pushed Gilda to the ground. Gilda let out a cry of surprise and she hit the ground, but was quickly on her feet and going after Zoe. Olivia quickly got between the two furious girls and held them back. Hold on, she said. I know another place. A better place. What place? Gilda asked, still furious. There's a lake. It's a few miles away from here, but it's worth it. My brothers took me back there last year when they were teaching me how to hunt. What lake? Asked Zoe. Just trust me. It's there, okay? The walk isn't that bad. We can bring some drinks and it's worth it. So the three girls went home to pack some drinks and snacks and then set out for the lake. They ventured through the woods down an old path for some time before Gilda stopped them. Okay, Olivia, we've been walking now for almost an hour. Do you really know where you're going? Olivia turned around. Of course I do. We can't miss it because there's a huge clearing right before the lake. We're close now, trust me. They continued walking for another 20 minutes and then reached the clearing. Suddenly, Zoe began to feel uneasy. What's the matter with you? Asked Gilda. Zoe turned and looked towards Olivia. My parents told me about this place. How a boy disappeared here 20 years ago. Olivia looked annoyed. So? So what? He was playing hide and seek with his friend and just vanished. Olivia smiled and walked over to Zoe. That was 20 years ago. What's the matter with you? I didn't know we were coming here. Don't you know about Shavis Kravis? The other two girls began howling with laughter. Oh my god, said Gilda. How old are you? That old hermit is just a fairy tale that parents tell little children so they don't come back here. Zoe began to get angry and walked over to Gilda. Oh yeah? And why would they do that? I don't know. Adults never want kids to go to neat places by themselves. Adults are just superstitious like that. Look, Olivia broke in. The lake is just behind this field, so you can either come along with us or walk back home. It's your choice. Zoe thought about it for a few seconds, then began walking forward ahead of the others. Well, are you coming? She called back. About 15 minutes later, they were at the lake. The three girls immediately dropped their belongings and ran over to the fresh, cool water, diving in with glee. Wow, Gilda shouted. This is so much better than that crowded old swimming pool. We have our own beautiful lake, all to ourselves. You certainly did good, Olivia. Olivia and Zoe smiled, and the three girls began splashing each other with the water. Several hours passed and the sun began to set. Maybe we should head back, said Olivia. It's going to be dark soon. Gilda thought for a moment. Now let's sleep here, she said. The other two girls looked surprised. Think about it, you two. We can wake up bright and early tomorrow morning and go swimming again, then walk back home at lunchtime. That's stupid, Zoe shouted. My parents don't even know where I am. They would be horrified to know I was here. Gilda looked over at Zoe with a condescending smile. You're just worried that the boogeyman is going to come tonight and take you away, aren't you? I'm not afraid of the boogeyman, but there could be real dangers out here. What about real crazy people that might pass through here at night, or wild animals? She might have a point, Olivia said. Gilda thought about it for a moment and then smiled. I think it's too late to go back now anyway. We have a long walk back, and when it gets dark, we'll get lost in the woods. So really, we don't have a choice in the matter. The other two girls weren't happy, but conceded to Gilda's point. After that, they got out of the lake and dried off. Then they laid down under a large chestnut tree and watched the sky grow darker. You can see a lot more stars back here, huh? Said Olivia.
Yes.
The three girls jumped up to see a dark, gaunt-looking man standing under the chestnut tree. "Who are you?" asked Gilda. The man simply turned and looked at her, saying nothing. He bent down and picked up a chestnut.
I like to pick up chestnuts, I find. I take home and roast them, eat them. Very good to eat. You can come home with me. We will roast chestnuts and eat.
"No thanks," she said. The haggard man turned to the other two girls.
You there? Come and eat at my house. Eat chestnuts.
Olivia and Zoe were frozen with fear. Then Gilda walked up to the man, the other two girls shaking their heads but saying nothing. "Are you Shavis Kravis?" she asked him.
My name is Shavis Kravis.
"Oh, really? Because Shavis Kravis is dead. He's been dead a long time now, so how can you be him? Do you want me to tell the police about you? Is that what you want?" She turned to look at her two friends who were now slowly backing away.
Shavis Kravis is dead. It hurts to be dead. Can't eat chestnuts when dead. Can't eat anything good when dead. Can't breathe when dead. It hurts terribly to be dead.
Then suddenly the man's form began to change. His skin began to deteriorate and putrefy before their eyes. Olivia and Zoe screamed and took off running, and Gilda just stood frozen in fear and disgust. Then the man, if he was still or ever had been a man, looked up at Gilda with dead eyes. He spoke now with a voice from the grave.
"But being dead never stop Shavis Kravis from harming children. Nothing ever stop Shavis Kravis from that."
Gilda screamed and finally found enough strength to turn and run, but was grabbed by a bony claw.
"You will stay with me, girl. You will stay with Shavis Kravis and eat chestnuts for him. Then Shavis Kravis will eat you."
Gilda screamed in absolute terror and cried out in desperation, struggling to escape the thing's icy grip. The horrid creature sank down into the dirt beneath the chestnut tree, dragging Gilda along with it until it and the girl were completely sucked down into the darkness of the earth. In the days to follow, the police and townspeople searched desperately to find the missing girl, and then later to find her remains. But nothing was ever found of Gilda, or of the frightening thing that had taken her.
From the time I was old enough to notice things, I didn't like that house. I was afraid of the upstairs. I never felt safe there. Mama always kept the light burning at bedtime because I was afraid of the dark. One evening when I was 9, my sister was downstairs and I was asleep in bed. She was expecting Mama to come home at any moment. When she heard the front door open, my sister called out, "Hello, Mama." But there was no answer. She heard footsteps, but they didn't sound like Mama. Her footsteps were light, but these were heavy, like a man. "Who's there?" my sister called, but there was no reply. The footsteps continued up the stairs and wandered into the bedrooms. But when my sister called out again, "Who's there?" the footsteps stopped. She was young and afraid, but she knew I was sleeping alone up there. So she took the lamp and searched all the rooms. She even went into the attic, but didn't find anyone. My sister went back down to the dining room, but as soon as she sat down, the footsteps started again. They came down the stairs, through the dark kitchen, and then the door of the dining room where my sister was sitting slowly began to open. She was scared out of her wits. "Get out!" she screamed. The door slowly closed and the footsteps moved out through the kitchen, towards the front door. She heard the door open and shut, so she ran to the window to see who it was. There was nobody in sight, and there were no footprints in the fresh snow. That was when she realized that whoever or whatever had walked in, it wasn't human. She huddled on the couch and waited for Mama to come home. Not long after that, we moved out. But something strange happened before we left. My sister and I were in the living room when all of a sudden we heard terrible groans. It sounded like someone was in agony. The groans seemed to be coming from the cellar. They were so loud that our dog started howling, and the hair stood up on the back of her neck. She would always go anywhere with me, but when I tried to coax her to come down into the cellar with me and investigate, she wouldn't go. The cellar was well lit, so my sister and I went down, following the groans until we came to a little alcove, and then the groans ceased. I wanted to dig right there on the spot, but there was no time. I've always felt that if we had, we would have found the cause of all our trouble. Perhaps someone's bones were buried there. We moved away soon after that, and Mama would never let me ask the people living there today if they had heard anything. We were all glad to get out of that house.
The bad news. Leon and Todd loved baseball. When they were young, they had played on the town's baseball team. Leon had been the pitcher, and Todd played second base. Now that they were a lot older, they spent their free time watching baseball games on TV and talking about baseball. "Do you think they play baseball in heaven?" Leon asked Todd one day. "That's a good question," said Todd, "but the one who gets there first should let the other one know somehow." As it turned out, Todd got to heaven first, and Leon waited patiently to hear from him. One day, Leon had found Todd, sitting in the living room, waiting for him. Leon was very excited to see him. "What is it like up there?" he asked. "And what about baseball?" "When it comes to baseball," said Todd, "I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that we do play baseball in heaven. We have some fine teams. I play second base on my team, just like I used to in the old days. That's the good news." "What's the bad news?" asked Leon. "The bad news," said Todd, "is that you are scheduled to pitch tomorrow."
There once was a guy living in our neighborhood named Jimmy. He got picked on a lot for being a confident and funny guy. His mouth tended to get him into a lot of trouble, and he seldom learned his lesson. He was just very content with who he was and refused to change it. When people asked him why, he let them wail on him for his blunt comedy and wisecracks. He'd smirk and say, "Honestly? Honesty is the best policy. At least they're not hiding anything from me, and neither am I from them." One of the kids he overtly pissed off with a rather crude MILF joke was something of a psychopath with a sadistic streak who didn't take kindly to the insult. So he rounded up some other guys who didn't like Jimmy. They cornered him after school in the science room. "Your mouth got you into this. I want you to remember that. Brett, the ringleader told him as he looked into Jimmy's terrified eyes. They grabbed some formic acid, stored in the lab, and threw it in his face, and they stood around watching him scream in agony as it ate through his flesh, pretending to be concerned and wanting to help him. When the paramedics arrived and were attending to Jimmy, who was no longer able to scream, the principal asked the boys if they knew what happened. Their leader, Brett, explained that they were walking past when they saw Jimmy skulking around the lab room, and by the time they got in there, he was already in that state. The other members joined in and backed Brett up with the old fake details, as Jimmy tried to protest in silent agony. The principal nodded, told them that he would speak to them after he had a word with Jimmy, and gotten his side of the story after he went to the hospital. A few days passed, and Jimmy was kept in the ICU with bandages on his face. The doctors salvaged what little they could of his face, his vision still intact in one eye, and his jaw withstanding despite the loss of flesh. He was still unable to speak and refused to respond to anyone. He just sat there, eyes unblinking and staring at the ceiling, bloodshot and filled with animosity. When he was discharged sometime later, he would not respond to anyone with anything other than the word liars. His social life gone, unable to smile or even crack a joke anymore, he secluded himself in his room and began planning. Sick, vindictive thoughts started appearing in his mind. He would get them all, one by one, discriminate them, slice them, burn them. He waited patiently until the group would be vulnerable late at night when they said their goodbyes and went home separately. That's when he would strike. That weekend, Brett received a package in the mail. Curiously, he opened it to find a VHS tapes with the word, "For You," etched crudely into the front. He put it in and played it. It was a crudely recorded home video by an unknown cameraman who didn't speak at all for the duration of the film. It began with the camera pointing at the date on a newspaper. It was yesterday. As he zoomed out, you could see it was in a basement, a single flickering light bulb hanging above and casting an uncomfortable scene. By the time he'd completely zoomed out, it was apparent this was no normal video. In front of the cameraman, and on his hands and knees, was one of Brett's friends. He was naked, a dirty blindfold around his face and crude gag in his mouth. He was covered in blood, horrific burns, lacerations, and wounds, and one particularly large one on his back stood out the most. It almost looked like a word. The cameraman with gloved hands took the gag out of the crying boy's mouth, and immediately he begged to go home. Please, please let me go, man. I did what you wanted. God, Jesse, Mike, Keith, you made me fucking butcher them. I want to go home, man. Please, I'm sorry, guy. I'm sorry. He just kept repeating it over and over, rocking back and forth as he did so. Brett's leg began to shake, and he felt the bile rising in his stomach. He could see the burned, mangled bodies in the background. The bodies of his friends, all of them having markings on their bodies in deep, large cuts. The cameraman reached out for the boy's chin and lifted it up, encouraging him to stand. He did so obediently, as he was slowly led to a door off-screen, whimpering. Brett could see what had been cut to the boy's back now. It's the word, liar. The camera cut out temporarily. When it restarts again, they're no longer inside. They're instead out in the cold snow, on the outskirts of the woods, and it doesn't appear to be the original man holding the camera anymore. It's Brett's friend. He's whimpering and shivering as he holds the camera in one place for 30 seconds, pointing at some trees in the distance, hearing footsteps draw ever nearer. Where are you, man? You said I could go. You said that I could go. the boy screaming and crying, frightened out of his mind as the sound of crunching snow draws near from seemingly every angle. It stops. He turns around to see the mangled face of Jimmy. A horrified howling blares through the speakers as the words "liar" appear before the tape abruptly stops. Brett feels faint and darts to lock the front door, knowing what's coming. As he turns to run for it, he immediately hits something and falls backwards. The last thing that he ever hears is "liars" as the acid runs down his face and begins to slowly eat away at his flesh. The last thing that he ever sees is Jimmy's face contorting into a sick and twisted smile.
The Intruder. Beth had just come back home from her date with John Patrick. They had both attended a dance that was held at their high school that night, and she was very tired. As she was getting ready for bed, a news report broke in on her radio.
A lunatic escaped earlier tonight from the West Side Insane Asylum. Police are asking everyone in the vicinity to lock their doors and stay on alert, as he is extremely dangerous.
Beth immediately began to feel worried. That hospital is very close by, she thought. As she lay in her bed that night, she found that she just couldn't sleep, just kept thinking about the lunatic and was terrified that she would see him staring in at her from her window. But she was so tired from a long night of dancing that she eventually fell asleep. She had not slept long when she was awakened by a scratching sound coming from beneath her bed. Beth jumped in horror. "Who's there?" she asked, but no one answered. Again she asked, "Is there somebody in here?" Again it was quiet. Maybe I was just imagining things, she thought. After all, she had felt very nervous after hearing the news report on the radio. She laid back down and closed her eyes. Immediately she jumped again. Now she was sure of it. She had heard something move under her bed for sure. "Who's in here?" she shouted. Then she heard a small whimper and felt great relief. "Rodney," she said, and reached under her bed. She could feel his fur, and she felt him lick her hand. Her mind at ease, Beth laid back down and fell asleep. The next morning, she woke up a bit late and smiled at the sunrise, feeling a bit foolish for the way she acted last night. As she got up, she walked into the bathroom and turned on the light. And screamed. There lay her dog, Rodney, completely eviscerated on the sink, and on the bathroom mirror, written in his blood, was "People can lick too."